So I'm Claire Fox, I'm the director of the Institute of Ideas. To put myself into some kind of context, I'm the ex-publisher of Living Marxism magazine. I'm a left-wing libertarian, and I think that whether we're left-wing, right-wing or whatever label we have, we should all be worried when we find out that the government has got something called the Behaviour Insight Team working for it. Because it doesn't matter what your politics are, they're trying to change your behaviour. And that's what we're here to talk about. The other thing I want to tell you is that I'm a smoker, pretty hardcore. Bloody hell. There is no way in the world that would happen. I didn't tell you that as either to get your applause or indeed to kind of act in a kind of confessional way, but because I think it also will explain a little bit about some of the arguments around nudge that we're going to discuss. How I'm going to conduct this is I'm going to give a bit of an overview for 5 minutes or so. I've then got 3 people who are going to whiz through their thoughts on the issue. We're going to have a quick chat amongst ourselves, but really this is an open conversation with you. And I'm going to go out and take groups of people to say whatever you want. You don't have to have heaps of questions, but if you don't know what something's about, feel free to ask. But if you just want to tell us what you think, feel free as well. I was at a policy discussion on public health recently, at which all of the policy room advisors in the room were complaining about those citizens who refuse to acknowledge the expert advice that they keep being offered. And they basically talked about the problem of people, this sort of hardcore 25% of people who keep smoking, no matter how demonised, banned, or whatever you do to them, they carry on smoking. They kept talking about the problems of young people binge drinking. I know that you're experts in that. And people like you were presented with a real problem. We keep doing all this advice and they just won't stop. So they basically sat and discussed how they could adopt, instead of trying to persuade us, because we're so hardcore we won't change, how they could adopt different forms of behaviour, manipulation and intervention that would make sure that we did take the experts' advice. They actually are supported by lots of people in government and politicians, have concluded that the time for debate is over. There's no room for discussion. We cannot be persuaded. We're completely irrational. There's no point having an argument with us or a public health campaign. And so the whole discussion that I sat through was a discussion of the different types of behavioural management and techniques that could be used to trick us into changing our behaviour so that we acted in accordance with best practice. That's what nudge is all about. And actually, its other name is libertarian paternalism, which is one of the reasons why it's important for us to discuss it, I think, here today. Because I was at a lunch with one of the nudge's chief proponents, Professor Richard Thaler, who's the American professor who was the co-author of the book Nudge, that has so influenced the Obama regime and, in fact, has had more influence on the Tories even than it did on New Labour. And he was over in the UK at the beginning of the year, or at the end of last year, and he's been given star treatment at Downing Street, and I was at a lunch with him. And he's an American economist, and he was absolutely shocked that I, who am known as a vocal critic of the nanny state, wasn't prepared to embrace his alternative. And he kept saying to me, nudge is an alternative to the bossy big state. In fact, at that lunch, the cheerleaders for nudge kept explaining to me that it was a libertarian alternative to heavy regulations. Instead of punitive sticks and petty legislation, they said, they were all talking about incentives, rewards, inducements. There was a big discussion about neuroscience, behavioural psychology, and so on. And they constantly kept saying, this is not state interference. They also stressed, and this is a very important part of this, that it wouldn't be the state that would do this. It would be, for example, big food corporations and so on, and alcohol companies who would do it. So, you know, it wouldn't cost any money, the state wouldn't be involved at all. So at the beginning of this year, we had Health Secretary Andrew Lansley launching a healthy eating initiative. And he actually has adopted it uncritically from New Labour. It's called Change for Life. And the slogan is, eat well, move more, live longer. I'm doomed. That's not going to slow. Lansley's twist on the new Labour version of this was that instead of kind of hectoring state intervention, that in fact they were issuing discount vouchers for brand name products distributed by News of the World and Asda. And so they've signed up Birdseye, Kellogg's, Flora Light, of course, Hellman Light Mayonnaise, and Asda's own brand foods to kind of have this war against junk foods. But again, it's not the legislation, it's simply the government backing big business. So shoppers aren't forced to change what they eat by the government, they're nudged by incentives. And I think you could say, what's wrong with that? And I just say loads, and I'll just give a couple of things and then I'll hand it over. The whole premise of nudge is that we're nudged in the right direction to follow a state-approved lifestyle. To me, that is a paternalism too far. It assumes that people's bad habits are the rightful targets for intervention by anyone. It's taken for given that we're drinking too much, that we need to reduce our alcohol consumption or whatever. But I think we have to ask, who decided that a model citizen in this country should be exercise-loving, abstemious, non-smoking, eco-conscious and dull? I think that we have to ask whether it is right that we allow anybody to say what are prescribed, preordained outcomes, even if they're nudging us into it. And I think it's an antithesis of freedom, and absolutely worse than the nanny state, because an essential component of freedom has to be that we're free to make unwise or wrong choices, and at stake is our autonomy and our agency. When third parties seek to undermine competent adults' decision about whether we eat healthily or how many units we drink, we know we're in trouble. So that's what we're here to discuss. You might all think, oh, I agree with that. Well, let me tell you, this is not in any way treated with suspicion. And I hope that there will be people who will be honest enough to think and say, actually, I think they've got something going for them. I mean, not, you know, it would be wrong if we all smugly sat here and said this is an easy argument. It isn't, let me tell you. So, if you're not sure, say. Let me introduce my panel. I've got, starting off with Joseph Finlayson, who is a self-described confused libertarian environmentalist. Somebody scream at him later. He's a student at Leeds University and is the co-president of Liberty at Leeds. He's going to be followed by Simon Wigglesford, who's a student at Warwick University, where I went actually, studying politics and history. He has a keen interest in philosophy, particularly political theory and ethics, and is the outgoing president of the Warwick Libertarians. And at the end there is Oliver Cooper, who is currently a student at the College of Law, who previously worked for The Sun after graduating from UCL, where he ran the Libertarian Society, and he's active in the Progressive Conservatives and is a freelance journalist. I think we've got all political spectrums here. While I was at Warwick University, I was a member of the Revolutionary Communist Party, which I stayed a member of for many years, and I am not, by the way, a regretful member of the Revolutionary Party. We all start saying, you're glad I've changed. I haven't. Okay, Joe, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you. So I'm going to make 2 points today, and they're going to be hopefully slightly different from the rest of the panel's points. So the first point I want to make is about innovation. You know, innovation doesn't just happen in business, it happens throughout society. You know, we're all innovating every day. We live at the edge of a margin of innovation. We try to mimic other people's ideas, and we create new ideas for ourselves. And the point I'm going to make is that this kind of nudging regulation restricts the amount of innovation, restricts the amount of dynamic change in our society. The next point I'm going to make is, in the book, the authors make the point that we're all irrational, we're all responding to automatic kind of decision making, we can't make decisions for ourselves. Well, I'm going to say that actually the experts themselves, they're subject to the same sort of automatic decision making and irrationality that everyone else is. So they're going to impose their flaws on the rest of us. So the first point I'm going to make is about pushing innovation. So I'm going to give a few examples to try and illustrate my point. I haven't thought too much about it. I'm going to give it to you raw as it is. So the first point about parenting. Parenting was very different 100 years ago, you know, and the ideas of the right form of parenting was incredibly different. It was authoritarian, it was strict. Victorians treated their kids like we would not imagine treating them today. But over time, some people thought we should try and parent a different way. Their friends in their social circle thought to themselves, well, actually, I quite like this. This parenting is quite successful. They mimicked it, they innovated it. And these kind of different types of parenting spread out like a ripple throughout society.